Tonight, breathe easy and settle in. This is a gentle, heart-steadying love story about a Boston apartment, a stubbornly hopeful narrator, and the kind, impossibly handsome neighbor whose smile changes everything. If you've ever wondered, hot guy next door, want to be my boyfriend? This one's for you. Take a listen. Before we begin, please like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs warm company tonight. Comment your neighbor crush story, breathe from your belly, and settle your shoulders. For best comfort, wear headphones, sip water, and know you're safe here. Held gently by this narration. Thank you for listening. The first time I saw him, I had a cardboard box balanced on my hip and a too ambitious plan to carry everything in 2 trips. It was late summer in Boston. That warm, honeyed light where the brick row houses look like they are keeping centuries of secrets. I had just moved into a 4th-floor walk-up in the South End, a building with a stubborn elevator that sometimes took the long way around, and a stairwell that smelled faintly of laundry detergent and rosemary. I was starting over at 40, a physician with a careful cadence and a hopeful heart I was still relearning how to use. In my world, I'm steady. I measure my words and check my pulse when stress climbs. On this day, my pulse climbed for another reason. He held the lobby door for me with a forearm that looked like it had met a few good planks of lumber in its time, and he smiled like he had no choice but to be kind. "Need a hand?" he asked, voice warm, Boston without bravado. I nodded, because even doctors know when to accept help, and because sometimes it is good medicine to let someone lift with you. He introduced himself in the elevator that groaned us upward. "I'm Jamie," he said, adjusting the box so I could breathe a little easier. "Jamie Brooks, 3rd floor. I've been meaning to tell the landlord that buzzer sounds like a foghorn." I laughed, the kind that loosens your shoulders. "Michael Hart," I said back, 4th floor. "New to the neighborhood, not new to foghorns." A strip of tape fluttered loose on my box, and he pressed it down with careful fingers, the kind of touch people use when they pay attention. In that small space between our palms, there was no spark in the fireworks sense. It was quieter. A small light turning on in a hallway that had been dim. When the elevator door opened on 4, Jamie followed me into the corridor, set my box down at my door, and gave a single certain nod. "Welcome home," he said. And those words, said like a simple fact, felt like a prescription for something I didn't know I needed. Moving is a ritual. You learn a building by the way sound echoes in its stairwell, by which floor collects the scent of someone's garlic and tomato sauce on Sundays, by the squeak of a lobby door at dawn. I learned our building by the clue of herbs from a neighbor's window box, and by the soft shuffle of Mr. Howard's slippers 2 doors down. He is 82, retired history teacher, and he reads the newspaper like it's a stubborn puzzle. Jamie carried 2 more boxes for me that afternoon, and we found an easy rhythm. He didn't ask too many questions, and I didn't force any answers. On the second trip, we crossed paths with Ms. Ramirez from the 2nd floor, who tapped my wrist gently and told me I had kind eyes. She looked Jamie up and down with the affectionate audacity of a grandmother and said, "Still not cooking for yourself?" He grinned and shrugged. "Working on it, Lillian." I tucked those names away like vitamins in a day-of-the-week organizer. I promised myself I'd learn everyone's favorite tea. When you've stood in rooms where people tell you what hurts, you learn to notice small comforts. In this building, comfort looked like rosemary, laughter in the stairwell, and the way Jamie held the door even when he didn't have to. The first week in a new place, your senses are tuned. You notice everything. The first night, Jamie's laugh came through the wall, a warm sound that made me smile without knowing why. Not too loud, just there, like a neighbor's porch light glowing through a window shade. I stood in my kitchen, a narrow rectangle with a stubborn stovetop and good light in the morning, and I chopped carrots like clouds lifting. I made soup because that's what I know how to do when I'm settling in. Chicken, dill, lemon, and the quiet satisfaction of tending to something. I put a container of it in the fridge labeled Mr. Howard because kindness is a habit, and sometimes the best way to meet people is to show up with a spoon and a smile. The next morning, on my way to work, I knocked on Mr. Howard's door and handed him the soup. He put his hand over mine for a second, thanked me, and said, "You'll like it here. We take care of each other." Down the stairs, Jamie appeared from the floor below with a toolbox slung like a briefcase. "Elevator's pouting again," he said. "I'll coax it." He cocked his head toward my messenger bag. "Doctor?" "Primary care," I said. "You?" "Carpenter," he answered, a little sheepish, like it was a family secret he loved. "I make old things sturdy." I nodded because that felt like we had just defined a friendship in one sentence. 2 weeks in, a thunderstorm knuckled across Boston like someone rolling marbles in the sky. I was on call but home, listening to the rain slap the windows, counting the seconds between lightning and thunder like a kid. The building lost power with a soft sigh. The refrigerator quieted. The hallway went velvet dark. Before I could find my lantern, there was a knock. Not a frantic one. 3 patient taps. I opened the door to Jamie holding a flashlight and 2 candles, one already lit, the wax pooling into a clean white circle. "Checking on you," he said. And I felt that thing again, that small hallway light flicking on inside me. We set the candles on the table like it was a planned ritual and sat across from one another while the rain softened to a steady drumbeat. In medicine, sometimes the best thing you can do is be present and observe. So we did. We talked about our days without delivering our resumes. He told me his dad taught him carpentry and the value of showing up even when you're tired. I told him I learned the same lesson, just in different clothes. We shared the last of the lemon cookies my mother had mailed. And he grinned in a way that made me memorize the shape of his dimples. On the 4th candle, conversation found vulnerability the way water finds low places. "I moved here after a breakup," I said, "because honesty is a stitch that holds a life together." 10 years. We were kind, but sometimes kindness can't fix everything. My voice didn't break. It didn't need to. It held. He nodded, eyes steady. "I dated someone," he said, rolling the wick between his fingers. We were not right, but we tried to sculpt ourselves into shapes that looked right. It wore us out. The rain softened to a hush, the kind Boston gets when all the streets shine. "I don't want to rush the next thing," he said. "But I also don't want to live in a waiting room." If you have ever sat in a waiting room watching a door you cannot open, you know that ache. I smiled, a small, simple thing. "We can just talk," I said. "We can learn the building's rhythm," he answered. "We can feed Mr. Howard and fix the buzzer." The power clicked back on, a blessing you feel most when it returns. We blew out the candles together, and when the smoke curled up, it smelled like something new and old at once. In the weeks that followed, our lives braided in quiet ways. On Mondays, Jamie watered the window boxes, and I pretended not to notice I was waiting for the sound of his boots in the hallway. On Wednesdays, I brought extra muffins to the lobby because Ms. Ramirez had a sweet tooth, and Jamie always took the one with the most blueberries because he said it felt like winning. We met in the elevator the way people in the same orbit do. By accident, that felt like design. He had a piece of sawdust in his hair one morning and a smudge on his cheek, and I reached out without thinking and brushed it away. We froze for a half second. 2 men in a small metal room, a moment of suspended breath. He smiled, eyes soft, and said, "I should start charging rent for the dust." I said, "No, please, it's the building's signature scent." We laughed, and that is how it went. Not fireworks. Not a dizzy sprint. A steady walk. On a Saturday, he texted me a photo of a crooked cabinet door in the common laundry room. "Need a consult?" it said. I brought my level, and he brought coffee in cups with our names spelled right. We fixed the door. We fixed a small part of our own loneliness, too. I told him about my patience in the way doctors can, with privacy intact and tenderness intact, too. I told him how some days were joy, like when a 70-year-old who'd been afraid to walk outside took her first slow lap around the block and sent me a picture of the sky. I told him how some days were heavy, like when grief sat down in the exam room and refused to leave. He listened the way good people do, without turning the conversation toward himself, but also without disappearing. He told me about building bookshelves that fit old walls that didn't run straight, about sandpaper as a meditation, about the glow in a client's eyes when their home felt like it was listening back to them. We shared playlists in a shy way. He sent me James Taylor and I sent him Brandi Carlile. We both sent each other silence sometimes, and that might have been the most intimate thing of all. There was one evening, cooling toward fall, when we sat on the stoop, watching the streetlights flicker on like a low-lit choir. A couple walked by holding hands, and Jamie nudged his shoulder against mine. Nothing dramatic, just enough to say, "I'm here." I'd be unkind to myself if I didn't tell you about the tripwire, because even the steadiest roads have a sudden dip. One morning, after a run along the Charles River where the water looked like poured glass, I turned the corner onto our block and saw Jamie on the stoop with a woman. My heart did that anxious thing where it presses the elevator button too many times. She was laughing, a hand on his arm. He handed her a bag that had the shape of Tupperware, and she hugged him quick and close. They looked natural. Clean, easy history. I felt my stomach go hollow. After a long relationship, there's a part of you that scans for danger, the old false alarms. I carried that old alarm up the stairs with my coffee and told myself a story about how he was sweet to everyone and how that sweetness wasn't mine. For most of that day, I left his text unanswered. He had sent, "Got an extra apple pie from a client, want some?" I told myself I was busy, which was true in the way excuses are sometimes true. It isn't the healthiest thing for a doctor to avoid a conversation, but doctors are human too. That night there was a gentle knock. 3 taps. Familiar. I opened the door to Jamie holding the aforementioned pie and a face that said he'd noticed the weather change. "Hey," he started, then paused, not barging into my mood. "I wanted to bring you this before I eat it all and make my genes mad at me." I stepped aside. He set the pie on the counter and leaned against the island. Respectful distance. Respectful quiet. I took a breath you could measure and said, "Who was that on the stoop?" He blinked, a little surprised by the bluntness, then softened. "My sister," he said. "Kara. She's a nurse in Worcester. She comes by when she's on, drops food on me so I remember I'm loved." My ears burned with both relief and chagrin. I nodded, which in my own body is the sign of the apology forming. "I have old reflexes," I said. I made up a story in my head and believed it. He nodded back, not minimizing, not scolding. "You don't have to be perfect to be here," he said, a sentence I have said to my patients and not always to myself. We cut the pie, and the first bite tasted like cinnamon and perspective. We made a pact, the kind you say without fancy words. Let's tell the truth quicker next time. Fall arrived like a deep inhale. The Maples did their fireworks show, and the city started wearing scarves. The building held a potluck in the lobby, a tradition Ms. Ramirez ran with the efficiency of a titan. Folding tables appeared, casseroles arrived, and someone plugged a speaker into holiday standards. Mr. Howard brought his famous potato salad. I contributed roasted carrots with cumin and orange, which became my sleeper hit of the evening. Jamie walked in with a lasagna that had a suspiciously neat corner missing. "Quality control," he said, and everyone clapped because this was the kind of building that clapped. Adults with hard weeks, standing in a circle with paper plates, clapped for a lasagna. That felt like medicine. At some point, Ms. Ramirez caught both our sleeves and tugged us into a picture with her between us. "These are my boys," she told her phone like it was a proud relative. Later, Mr. Howard sat down on the stair and I slid next to him. He took my hand for a second and his grip felt like the handle of a well-used mug. His eyes twinkled at Jamie and me. "You're good for each other," he said, not in a matchmaking way, but like someone naming the weather. Naming the weather is a useful skill. We could have stayed in that slow orbit forever, content to measure the days by muffins in the lobby and laughter through the wall. But there is a point where kindness wants a name. We found ours on a Saturday that looked like it had been made by a postcard factory. Sunlight, crisp air, a farmer's market that smelled like apples and coffee. Jamie and I walked shoulder to shoulder through it, saying hello to vendors who knew his name. A little boy tugged his mom's sleeve and pointed at us and said, "Those are the guys who fixed the dryer." The mom smiled apologetically. Jamie smiled and wiggled his fingers. We bought peaches because it felt like a warm choice. And we bought a loaf of bread we did not need because the baker told me I had a calm voice and I am human, and that felt like a compliment. We carried our small empire back to my kitchen and made grilled cheese with cheddar and tomato. The scent of butter on cast iron felt like memory. After lunch, we did not rush to the next plan. We sat. That is an underrated skill. We let the afternoon rearrange itself around us like a cat in a patch of sun. He was the one who spoke the sentence that changed the shape of our days. He didn't make a speech. He didn't ask with grand gestures. He just looked at me like something had clicked into place. "Michael," he said, and my name sounded like it had been resting on his tongue for weeks. "Want to be my boyfriend?" It was playful, sure. It was also brave, and it asked for clarity without 1,000 caveats. In the exam room of my life, sometimes I over-explain. In this kitchen, I didn't. I smiled, slow and certain. "Yes," I said. "I do." Saying yes is sometimes the bravest thing we do. He exhaled a laugh that sounded relieved, then stood and came close, not assuming, just arriving. Our first kiss was leaning against the counter that had seen soup and bread and late-night tea. It was soft, not a movie crescendo, more like a good deep stretch after a week of tight muscles. It tasted like cinnamon sugar from the morning cruller and salt from a life where we had both cried before. He kept his hand on my shoulder, gentle, a place that felt sturdy. We broke apart with a kind of shy smile that only grown adults can manage. The room didn't spin. It steadied. Being boyfriends didn't change the building. It changed the way I could rest my hand in the small space between his elbow and his side in the elevator. It changed the good morning texts to include a photo of his coffee cup, with a heart badly drawn in foam, and a picture of my scrubs with thumbs up. It changed the way I arranged my calendar because I suddenly wanted to make room the way you do when a guest becomes family. Early on, we set a pace that felt human. Once a week, real date. Once a week, companionable silence in the same room doing different tasks. We became each other's soft check-in. On a Tuesday, I got a text, "Hydrate today, hot out." On a Friday, he got one that said, "Stretches matter, carpenter, back care is love." We learned to translate each other. When I got quiet, he gave me space and sent a photo of the sunset from the roof. When he got chatty about nothing, I answered like it was everything. We swapped books. He read a memoir by a nurse and cried on page 87. I read a novel about a carpenter and started noticing dovetail joints. We made fun of ourselves, then we made dinner. The first time he came to my clinic to bring me lunch, it caught me in the throat. He texted me ahead because he is not one to ambush. I had a break between patients, and there he was in the waiting room holding a brown bag with a warm rectangle inside. He looked up and did not shrink himself in that medical space. He greeted the receptionist, introduced himself, and when Ms. Green from exam room 2 poked her head out, he offered her a smile that was gentle, not performative. He left me a grilled chicken wrap and a note that said, "You take care of everyone. This is me taking care of you, just a little." I tucked that note in the pocket of my white coat, where it stayed like a talisman on heavy days. Later, when work stretched long and I got home late, he had left his own note on my door with a magnet shaped like a lighthouse. "Soup on the stove. Stretch your neck, then eat. Proud of you." The thing about being with someone kind is that kindness multiplies in you. You find yourself more patient in traffic. You find yourself saying hello to the mail carrier with interest, not just habit. That is how love works at ground level. We met each other's people. My mother visited from Ohio and stayed in a nearby hotel because that is the arrangement that makes aging relationships and adult sons peaceful. She is a librarian with opinions about everything, and she arrived with a lemon pound cake and a cautious curiosity. Jamie met her on the stoop and offered to carry her bag. She scoffed and let him take it anyway. Over coffee at my kitchen table, my mother and Jamie compared notes on New England winters. He told her he checked in on the older residents when the snow came. She liked that so much I could see her revising her mental file. Later, she and I took a walk around the block to talk in that way mothers and sons do, which is to say in parts. She squeezed my arm and said, "He looks at you like you are a person and not a project." I swallowed something grateful and said, "Yes." In turn, Jamie's sister Kara came by with a casserole that could feed a rowing team and hugged me like we were midway through a story together. His friends from the carpentry shop had hands with clean cuts and warm laughs, and they told the kind of jokes you learn in sawdust. I laughed with them, and then I listened to them talk about wages and respect and being tired in a way that felt like a trust. We also learned how to argue because any relationship built only on agreement is a house of cards. Our first real disagreement was about a weekend away. I wanted to plan 3 things. He wanted to plan 0. We met somewhere in the middle, which is where care lives. I said, "I like a plan because the world is chaotic and my days are scheduled 6 minutes at a time." He said, "I like a blank page because my days are measured in splinters and deadlines and other people's walls. I want one weekend that is ours and airy. We found a solution with 2 activities and space around them." He took me to a bookstore where he had built the shelves 5 years ago. I found a novel I had been meaning to read. We went to a diner where the waitress called everyone honey and slid a plate like it was a magic trick. We returned to Boston on Sunday night and sat on the stoop watching the lights. We were not a couple that needed a bold move every hour. We needed small, consistent offerings, a hand on a shoulder when the hallway was crowded, a glass of water on the bedside table, a text that said, "I saw a dog wearing a sweater and thought of you." It would be dishonest to skip over the day everything felt fragile for a different reason. Late one afternoon, his text came in short and strange. "Minor accident at site. At ER for stitches. Not urgent." My clinical brain turned on first, as it does, followed by the human one. I arrived at the emergency department with a calm surface and a nervous undertow. He sat on a gurney with a cut above his eyebrow, a rakish bandage, and a sheepish smile. The doctor, a colleague, nodded at me in that friendly, we've met on conference panels way and said, 5 stitches. He'll have a movie star scar just a little. Jamie made a face that said his eyebrow did not want a career change, then reached for my hand when the lidocaine went in. I let him hold with the kind of firm you give when someone you love hurts. After I told him the scar made him look like he had wrestled a dragon. He grinned and whispered, "Did I win?" In the car home, we didn't fill the quiet with jokes. We let the thing that had scared us be present. He said, "I don't like how your face looked when you walked in." I said, "I don't like that you were lying there and I couldn't fix it." He squeezed my fingers and said, "Fix is your job word. Here it can be just sit." Winter in Boston is a study in endurance. The first snow comes like a gift. The 5th arrives like a chore. We made rituals to steady ourselves. Saturday mornings, we drank coffee on the stoop in hats, just for the principle of it. Weeknights, we cooked soups and stews that fogged the windows and made the building smell like comfort you could eat. We checked on Mr. Howard when the ice felt bossy, and we learned which part of the sidewalk froze first. It was a long December. Jamie came to my work holiday party and wore a sweater my friends voted most dangerous. He charmed, but in the modest way of a person who can listen as well as talk. In return, I went to the shop holiday open house where I learned the difference between a tenon and a mortise, only to forget it later and make him laugh. On Christmas Eve, we invited the building to a pot of chili and a bowl of salad because community is a word that matters only if you practice it. Ms. Ramirez brought flan. Mr. Howard told a story from 1968 that, for a while, made us forget our phones existed. I went to bed that night with the smell of cinnamon in my hair and love in my pocket. We decided that gifts would be small and useful. That is an underrated category. I made him a first aid kit for the shop that fit in a handsome wooden box he had built. He laughed until he got shiny-eyed and said he was going to name the box Doctor. He made me a spice rack that fit my kitchen like it had always lived there, and he filled it with the smells of our year: cumin, smoked paprika, rosemary, and a little jar labeled everything, because he is both earnest and silly. We spent New Year's Eve with 2 other couples and a playlist we argued joyfully about. Then we slipped home before midnight to sit on the stoop, because we are not a crowd midnight couple. The neighborhood counted down in muffled waves. We held hands in our coats and kissed lightly when the far-off shout said it was time. After we just breathed. The cold air felt like a promise. "I want to keep choosing you," he said, and it felt less like a movie line and more like a plan. "Me too," I said. We went upstairs, fell asleep with the kind of ease you earn, and woke to a first day of the year that had the humble weight of a good mug in your hand. Spring woke up slowly, like a cautious person stretching after a long night. The city unbuttoned its coat. The trees did that neon green that makes everyone a little giddy. We planted herbs in a window box together. Basil, thyme, and a brave little rosemary that we both agreed would outlast us all. We took long walks on the esplanade and waved to dogs like they were dignitaries. Sometimes we talked about the future in soft focus. We didn't plan rings or anything too tight, but we planned the next Sunday breakfast and the next time we'd go see his dad in New Hampshire and the paint color for the hall. We painted it in our minds so many times the walls blushed. At work, I started seeing his kindness echo in me on harder days. With him, He said he started making lunch more often because he didn't want to spend money that could go to a small trip to Portland, Maine, where we had eaten an unforgettable lobster roll once and laughed at our amateur shelling skills. That is how you know you have something sturdy. You make small adjustments not out of fear, but out of care. We did stumble, because life requires maintenance. One particularly long week, I came home depleted, the kind of tired that makes you a little brittle. He had planned a surprise, a hockey game with seats close enough to see the grit of the ice. I didn't have the bandwidth for noise, and I didn't say it well, I snapped. He snapped back, then stopped, lifted both hands, and said, "Let's try that again." We did. We sat at the kitchen table. He rested his elbows like he was building something precise. "I want to do things with you," he said. "But I also want to protect your energy. You have a right to say no. I have a right to feel disappointed. We can hold both." I exhaled a laugh that sounded a little like relief. "We can," I said. So we stayed home, ate takeout, watched a quiet documentary about a gardener, and put the hockey tickets into an envelope for another night. The next day I left him a note in the spice rack. "You're my favorite quiet." He texted me a picture of the rosemary with the words, "We're doing okay, doctor." In May, our building hosted a yard sale. Items appeared on the sidewalk like offerings to the gods of second chances. Jamie put out a set of old chisels he had outgrown. I put out a lamp that had followed me from 3 apartments and never quite fit. A little boy bought the lamp with 3 crumpled dollars and a grin that could power a city. Ms. Ramirez sold 3 crocheted blankets before noon. Mr. Howard insisted on paying me 75 cents for a book. I had already given him twice. A woman I didn't know held up a picture frame and asked if it had ever had anything important in it. "Not yet," I said, and she smiled in a way that told me it would soon. Jamie bought a red thermos he did not need because it looked like adventure, and then drank water out of it with a grin. That afternoon, when the sidewalk was back to itself and the day had softened, Jamie pulled that empty picture frame from behind his back like a magic trick and said, "Thought we could use this." We put inside it a photo Ms. Ramirez had taken of us on the stoop, eyes crinkled, shoulders touching. It looked like 2 men who had found something they could lean on. Summer returned, and with it, the hum of window units and the clink of ice in glasses. A year had rolled through my life like a careful wave, and I found myself not just steadier but deeper. We took a weekend trip to Provincetown with friends and walked until our calves protested, then ate soft serve at midnight because rules can take a back seat to joy sometimes. On the drive back, he turned down the music and said, "I keep thinking about the first night we lost power. I came to your door because I wanted to make sure you were okay. I didn't know I was also walking toward myself. It was the kind of sentence you put on a shelf because it will feed you for years." I reached over and touched his arm at a stoplight. "I knew you were good then," I said. "Not flashy good. Quiet good." He made a face like he was trying not to tear up and failed. We pulled into our street, and it felt like our names were written on it somewhere small. We carried our bags up the stairs and put our laundry in piles and ate pasta with nothing but olive oil and salt because we were tired and happy, and that is enough. People like to draw a straight line from first hello to forever, but the actual path is made of check-ins and small course corrections. In July, my schedule became a puzzle when 2 colleagues took leave. I fell into a mode where I was efficient but not always alive. Jamie noticed before I did that my laugh had changed shape. He did not scold. He stacked kindness next to me. He sent a link to a free outdoor concert. He texted me at noon. "How many breaths have you taken on purpose today?" I answered. 2. He wrote back, "Shoot for 4 by 5 p.m. Later, we sat on the stoop and counted breath like we were putting coins back in a jar. I told him I was worried I would disappoint patients if I took time off. He told me, with the authority I recognize in myself when I tell people hard truths, that I was human and that humans reset or they break. I took 2 days. I slept, met a friend for tea, and went back to work less impressive and more real. He sent me a sticker that said, "Proud of you." Not for the badge, but for the practice of saying things out loud when they matter. We kept growing sideways and deep. When the building's ancient buzzer finally died mid-August, Jamie took a Saturday and installed a new one, with gentle swearing and the kind of focus that makes hours disappear. I was his helper, which meant I held the flashlight and handed him tools like a surgeon's assistant and tried not to be offended when he laughed at the word doohickey. When we finished, he rang all the apartments like a kid with a new toy and everyone cheered down the line. It felt like a small parade. Later, we brought popsicles to the stoop and passed them to neighbors like communion. It is easy to romanticize community. It is also true that community is built by saying yes to small tasks and being patient with each other when the stairwell gets dusty. We did our share of sweeping. We did our share of laughing when someone left a passive-aggressive note about a laundry machine and then immediately apologized in the group chat with 12 heart emojis. You cannot make this stuff up and you don't have to. Life provides enough story if you pay attention. There is a picture from late August that lives on our fridge. We are on the beach in Ipswich, both wearing sunglasses, both squinting into a future that looks bright enough to require them. My arm is around his back. His is around my waist. We take up the space we should. When I am old, and I hope I get there, I want to be this gentle with myself about the risk of love. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it works because you work at it. Because you say the thing sooner. Because you name your own ghosts and invite someone brave enough to sit with them. Because you remember to drink water and to be on time and to buy the good honey for the person who has had an especially long day. When I say that being with Jamie is easy, I don't mean it's effortless. I mean the effort feels worth it in my bones. I mean the things we add to our days, popsicles on steps, herb boxes, notes on doors. A shared laugh in an elevator balance the scales in the direction of joy. Sometimes, on a quiet night, Jamie will turn his face toward the wall and whisper, "Do you ever think about how we could have missed each other? If I had moved a month earlier, if you had chosen the building on Tremont instead." I think about that less as fate and more as a bike ride. The wind's going to blow and you still steer. We made choices that put us in the path of that lobby door moment. We said yes to unknowns. We knocked when the power went out. We named the feeling instead of letting it stew. I do not know what the future holds in a grand way, but I can tell you this. When Jamie reaches for my hand, while we both pretend not to watch the elevator count the floors, I feel like I'm in the right place. When he rests his palm on my shoulder while I'm stirring soup, I feel like the world's noise has been turned down to a level that lets my heart speak. I keep thinking about something Mr. Howard said on a day that felt ordinary in the best way. We were all on the front steps. He held his paper, looked at us, and said, "There's young love, and there's love you can take a nap in." He went back to the crossword, like the matter was settled. I want this nap-worthy love, not because we are sleepy, though we sometimes are, because it means safety. It means you can lay down your vigilance. You can take off the backpack of old fear and rest. Jamie and I are building that in a building with a new buzzer and a window box that smells like rosemary in the rain. We are building it by staying when the conversation gets uncomfortable and by laughing at ourselves when we are silly. We are building it by asking out loud the simple, brave questions that bring clarity. He asked me if I wanted to be his boyfriend at a kitchen counter smelling like cinnamon in summer. I said yes. If you are listening and your heart aches with wanting something like this, know this. You deserve love that checks on you during a storm. You deserve to be asked with gentle courage. You deserve to be the person who asks, too. And on nights when the sky over Boston goes purple and quiet, and the city sets down its tools for a while, and somewhere a buzzer rings like a friendly bell, I sit on our stoop with Jamie and feel the way the day slides into the dark like a warm blanket tucked up to your chin. He leans his shoulder into mine. We watch the street do its small theater. We listen like people who know things are worth hearing. And sometimes, even now, he turns to me with that playful tilt, that memory of our kitchen, and he says, "Hot guy next door, want to be my boyfriend?" And I answer with a smile I feel in my chest. Always. In a world that can be loud and sharp, we have built one small, soft room where even the air feels kind. If you need that reminder tonight, take it from us, from a doctor with an old soul and a carpenter with steady hands. Love can be quiet and strong and still thrilling. Love can be the steady light in your hallway, the door held open, the laugh through the wall. Love can be here next door and also in you.